Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
And we'll begin with this bizarre situation that continues to unfold in North Kensington. We've just learned, we believe, I don't know that it's actually been confirmed yet, but we believe that a task force is being sent in by central government to take over parts of Kensington and Chelsea Council. This, of course, in the wake of the fire at Grenfell Tower. On the 14th of June, at least 80 people now dead. One council leader, one chief executive, one deputy council leader gone. And now the government, the national government, apparently poised to send in a task force to take over the entire housing department. Not just the job of rehousing the survivors of the inferno, but the entire housing department. And do you know, for once, I don't know what question to ask you this morning, because the thing that keeps forming or crystallising in my mind is that slightly throwaway phrase that we employ a lot on the programme about public services, essential services, emergency services. They're there in case you need them. It's the fundamental flaw in all sort of neoliberal or capitalist ideology is that things are only worth according to how much you need them. But of course, fire engines and council services have to be paid for even when you're not using them. This seems to me, and I could be oversimplifying things, but this seems to me to be at the very heart of the fraudulent nature of arguments put forward by people who claim they're in favour of a small state. They want less government. They want a smaller state. Because by all means, today there haven't been any fires, there haven't been any road accidents, no blocks of flats have been turned into bloody infernos. We don't have any sort of massive casualties that demand huge amounts of attention from paramedics, ambulances, doctors, hospitals. So we'll get rid of them all. And then you need them tomorrow. What do you do? That's a massive, massive oversimplification, obviously, but I think at the heart of it, there's a kernel of truth, isn't there? If you get rid of things because you didn't need them yesterday, then what happens if it turns out you do need them tomorrow? And I just wonder whether Kensington and Chelsea's ability to offer that £100 rebate to every council taxpayer in the borough 3 years ago was built upon possibly well-meaning, probably not, but a deliberate attempt to save money by not spending it on things that you might need tomorrow. Because you never know, it's going to sound a little glib, I might break into song, you never know what tomorrow brings. And on the morning of 14th of June, it brought a tragedy and horror on an almost unprecedented scale. And it appears that the system in place in the wealthiest borough in the land, pound for pound, that is some of the richest land in the world. And they were utterly ill-equipped to cope with a tragedy that, while unprecedented, it's not beyond the realms of imagination, is it? And in fact, as once again we return to that dreadful blog, dreadful in the most accurate sense of the word, full of dread, that dreadful blog written by the Grenfell Action Group that laid out in uncertain terms, in absolutely certain terms, it laid out the possibility of problems like this occurring, of horrors like this unfolding. So it was not beyond imagination, because many people living in the block and all of the people contributing to that blog were imagining it and explaining it. And yet the system seems to have been utterly unfit for purpose. And again, I don't know what question to ask you, because what do we do with that, you and me? You know, we pay our taxes, right? We pay our council tax and our income tax. We kind of toe the line. We play by the rules, don't we? Most of us. Most of the time. And there's a sort of tacit expectation, I've realised in the last 3 weeks. There's a tacit expectation under that contract that you have with government, whether local or national, whether you voted for them or not. The tacit expectation when you pay your tax is that certain things will happen in return. There's the obvious stuff. Like, you know, if you're an employer, you're going to have access to a workforce that has been educated at the Treasury's expense. If you get poorly, you're going to get treated in hospital. If someone throws a brick through your window tonight and you dial 999, a police officer will hopefully turn up. There's a tacit expectation, a social contract, if you will, between the taxpayer and the government. And the more I look at Grenfell Tower, 3 weeks later, they send in a task force to run parts of local government. The more I look at that, the more I wonder whether we're actually seeing an epic breach of contract on the part of government. And how do you know where you live whether or not your local authority would cope any better? It wouldn't have to be. I think the most horrible element of the story at the moment, of the aftermath, not of the tragedy itself, is the ease with which presumably well-meaning and decent members of the British public have somehow been conditioned and persuaded to start hating on the survivors. This rhetoric today about that some of them have turned down the property, the accommodation they've been offered. Well, how dare they? They should jolly well take it. There's plenty of homeless people who'd be glad. It just beggars belief, doesn't it? Even by the standards of 2017, that a country like ours, built supposedly on Christian values, can look at people whose lives have been utterly obliterated. The people still alive are the lucky ones, and they've got nothing. Holed up in hotels without even a toothbrush to call their own until the aid and the support system kicks in. And somehow we've created a country now, and a supposedly Christian country, that looks at these people and thinks that it's appropriate to ask a question about whether or not they should have any choice whatsoever in where they live next. Turning down accommodation. What if it's in a tower block? What if it's in a tower block and the very sight of a tower block turns their bowels to jelly? Oh, stuff them. Make them live there. They're probably foreign anyway. What if they can't go up and down stairs at the moment? Because the last time they went up and down stairs, they were on their hands and knees with their lungs screaming, clutching for atoms of breath that were choking them and killing them and coating them in tar and toxic. Oh, stuff them. Make them take it. How dare they turn down their accommodation? What if it's in a basement flat and they've got kids with asthma and it's next to a busy... Oh, stuff them. Sod them. Who do they think they are? They should jolly well take it. They're probably foreign anyway. What have we become? What have we become? What actually have we allowed ourselves to become? Oh, stop virtue signalling. Why don't you put them up in your bedroom or your house? Just quite incredible. When the most fundamental tenet of civilization, forget about Christianity for the moment, the most fundamental tenet of any civilization is that you treat others as you would hope to be treated yourself. So if your entire street was wiped out tonight in a gas explosion and fingers were being pointed at the local council and blogs had been written suggesting that the way the new gas pipes had been installed was likely going to be a death trap, and boom, it came true, and your whole street got wiped out, whether you had a mortgage, whether you paid rent, whether you were a social housing tenant or a private tenant, whether you were mortgage free and you'd owned the house for the last 10, but it's gone. Some people have got insurance, some people haven't. Treat others as you hope to be treated yourself. Some people on social media and elsewhere apparently would like to be treated like scum when that happens. You can go and live in that cage over there. You can go and live in that tower block, almost identical from the inside to the one in which you nearly burnt to death and your neighbours and family members did. This is Great Britain in 2017, and people who have endured unimaginable horror now face the almost unbelievable horror of seeing their fellow citizens, their fellow residents of this wonderful, wonderful country. They see their fellow residents of this wonderful country turn to them with all of their worldly goods gathered in a paper bag, and they're being told to shut up, suck it up, take what you're given, be grateful for what you've got. That's quite incredible, even by the standards of the last 2 years, where the combination of Donald Trump and some domestic developments have seen an absolute diminishment of the most fundamental values of humanity. All this smug presumption in the West that we were fundamentally decent, and if push really came to shove, things like holocausts don't happen. We can't actually be turned against our own neighbours. There's no earthly way that someone whose home has burnt down is going to receive anything but love, warmth and support from this Christian country. Ah, well, every time you think things have got about as bad as they could possibly get, they get worse. But I don't want to talk about that today. I can't, actually. I haven't got the moral strength to talk to people who think that the survivors of Grenfell, should be treated with anything other than love, warmth and support. £300 million in the Kensington and Chelsea current account. £300 million. And we're even having a conversation about what those poor people deserve. Well, I can't. I'm sorry. For once, I'm not fit for purpose. I'm not up to the task. I actually can't face the thought that fellow human beings who I call neighbours, who I would speak up for if they found themselves in trouble, are lining up today to pour abuse, scorn and criticism on human beings who nearly burned to death and who almost certainly lived alongside people who have. How dare they not want to live in a property that reminds them of the one they just lost? How dare they not want to live in a property that's grossly inferior to the one they've just lost? How dare they not want to live in whatever hovel they're offered by the council that is so unfit for purpose? A Prime Minister had to apologise for the incompetence and inadequacy of their response. And 3 weeks after the event, they send in a task force. But hey, you should do whatever that council tells you to do, because you're probably foreign. Rule Britannia. There's an old saying, Andrew in South Wales tells me, for 100 years you'll never need an army. For one day you cannot live without one. I think the same is true about the NHS, the fire brigade, the police, and what happened at Grenfell Tower is proof enough. I'm heartbroken today. I'm not going to lie to you. I would have thought, even exposed as I am to the worst excesses of right-wing results, the results of right-wing rhetoric and hate-mongering in this country, I honestly would not have believed that the survivors of the Grenfell Tower tragedy could become the focus for the 2-minute hate that the country indulges in every time the Daily Mail hits the newsstands. It's quite incredible to me, and I mean, you can probably tell it's one of those days I could comfortably keep talking between now and 1 o'clock, but most people don't have that opportunity for talking cures and therapy. The question I should probably ask you is, how have we come to this? How are we even having conversations about whether people whose entire lives have gone up in flames deserve anything other than full support, warmth and love from the rest of the country? How have we come to this? Any thoughts? Have we always been like this? Has it always been there? This is what political correctness kept from the front line. It's always been there. That's why people got so cross about political correctness, because they knew how vile and disgusting they were, but they felt utterly, utterly frustrated by the fact they weren't allowed to be like that in public. Am I being naive when I say that 10 years ago, if this had happened, nobody would have had the front to say out loud in public, screw them. Let them stay wherever they want. Deport them. 10 years ago, we wouldn't have done that, would we? What's happened? Actually, I am going to ask you that question. If you can't answer it, I will keep talking until 1 o'clock. So you've been warned. 0345 6060 973. What's actually happened to us? That people who endure unimaginable horror within 3 weeks of seeing their entire existence go up in smoke, they're getting it in the neck from some corners of the great British public for having the audacity to not want to live in property that's inferior to the one they've lost, or which reminds them of the horrors they endured, or which transplants them away from their schools, GPs, friends, communities and families. What's happened to us? Layla's in Woolwich. Layla, what would you like to say?
Hello, thank you for taking my call. This morning I woke up, normal day, came downstairs and I was feeding my little one, and I put the radio on as I usually do, and it was Nick Ferrari's show.
No, steady on. Go well. All right.
Sorry. There was this individual that was talking to him, and I just couldn't make the breakfast anymore. I put everything down, and I was listening to him really, really carefully, just so I don't misunderstand what he's saying. He came across so callous, so...
Well, we don't have to pick on any one individual, and I may not have heard the one you refer to. We're describing a mindset that responds with anything other than concern.
Oh, my goodness, yeah, and it's so inhumane. Just the basic kindness was not in his voice, the basic compassion. He was talking about these people as they were inhumane, subhumane. And
what's happened? What's happened? I refuse to surrender at this point. My profound hope that 10 years ago, although these people existed, they wouldn't have put their head above the parapet in public. What's changed, Layla?
It's okay to say these things. It's fine. It's a platform given to them, a right that they must display. They can't keep it in anymore.
Why not?
The fact that they're told that you have a right to speak up. Don't shut up. If you have anything good or bad to say, let everyone hear it.
I kind of thought I subscribe to that school of thought in lots of ways. But you just think that shame would kick in. So by all means, enjoy and exercise freedom of speech, but have some shame as well.
There's no boundary. There's no balance of thought. Like you think first before you speak, and you think, how is this going to affect even myself? Because you're hurting yourself. You're not just hurting other people that you don't even know. Well, that's such a good point. John takes it up in this text. He says, thank you for stating just how disgustingly people are treated by society today. Yeah. The I'm all right, stuff everyone else attitude is everywhere. Exactly. And everyone who buys into the I'm all right, stuff everyone else, they could be the ones that need help tomorrow. That's the thing I struggle to understand. Absolutely. And I can I just say, as myself, my name is Layla Hassan Suleiman. I live in Woolwich, the borough of Royal Greenwich, and I feel my heart goes out to these families, whatever culture they come from, whatever background, whatever colour. I'm human. I'm a mother, I'm a sister, I'm a daughter. I love you guys. I wish the best for you. I wish I could give you guys what I have in my hand. And do you know what else? When I hear the echoes already that will be forming in the back of some people's bile ducts, they'll say she's virtue signalling. Why doesn't she put them in her bedroom? To which you turn around and you say, this borough has £300 million in the bank. Yes. Yes, they do. It's not Layla's job to rehouse. It's not money. Yes. It's not money. For me, it's showing humanity, showing someone you care. You wish you could do more. You wish you could give something that you don't need today. You do everything you can, but there's something called humanity, and we're losing it. We are. I think we are. I'm sorry that you're upset. I'm upset myself, and I don't want to be upset. I want to see the glimmer of hope, or the evidence, the reassuring evidence that we're talking about a tiny minority. We had hope in that community. They came together. They showed us what it means to be human. And today they've been spitting up. They've been told you're not important, you're not valued, you're valueless. We don't care what you need. Just shut up. We don't want to hear you anymore. We don't want to hear the word Grenfell. And I knew this was going to happen. Did you? In my heart, I knew this was going to happen. I swear, I did. Because we've created a country in which callousness is fetishized. It gets you jobs on radio, it gets you newspaper columns, it gets you reality TV slots. It's become a sort of, I don't know what it would have been 10 years ago, the equivalent of posing on Page 3. It seems to have become as banal as that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, we're not. No. Well, as long as people like you are out there, the rest of us can carry on hoping. Actually, and it's important that 27 minutes after 10. What's happened to us? That's all I'm asking. I don't believe that 10 years ago, if a tower block had burnt down in a major British city in circumstances that look profoundly suspicious, profoundly avoidable, I just don't believe that my fellow citizens would be queuing up to condemn and criticise the survivors for having the audacity to turn down temporary accommodation. My life's just been turned upside down. I don't want to move. Imagine it was your children playing with some second-hand toys out of a plastic bag because everything they've ever owned has gone up in flames. And you don't want to move them again into temporary accommodation. Next time you move them, you want it to be their forever home. The one they've just lost. The home that is theirs for the foreseeable future. That's all. You're not being greedy. You're not being in any way unreasonable. You just don't want to move your kids until you can say to them, this is your bedroom. We can put up your posters. We can decorate the walls. We can paint the banisters. This is your home, darling. You won't be moving again, I promise you. And that's not what they're being offered. They're being offered temporary accommodation, but screw them because they're probably foreigners. And that's the Britain we've built. That's how we have got back control. That's how we've made Britain great again, by turning vast swathes of the population into vicious, small-minded, mean-spirited fools. Because the foolishness lies in the failure to recognise that if you create a callous society, all is well and good while you think you're on the winning side of the callousness. Tomorrow, you'll be on the losing side. And there might not be anybody left to speak up for you.
Your house goes up in flames. Oh, we don't need to rehouse. Look what we got away with at Grenfell. There's some massive tragedy or disaster that we get caught up in. And you turn to government, local and national, in expectation of support. When it comes, it's inadequate. When you don't accept inadequate support, well, they unleash the dogs of hell in the Daily Mail comment sections or the LBC Facebook page or wherever it may be. And people are patting themselves on the back and patting each other on the back, saying, do you know what? I think you're almost as disgusting as I am. It's a pleasure to meet you. God, I love social media. People burnt to death. And 3 weeks later, we're arguing about whether or not the survivors should have any choice at all about where they move to next. I don't understand that. I don't know how that has happened. I really don't. I got some theories, but I just don't get it. Has it always, if you're older than me or perhaps a little bit more cynical than I am, has it always been like this? Just takes a tragedy like Grenfell to focus the mind? Has everything always been this hateful? Is this why humankind invented religion? To actually keep these impulses at bay, to actually tamp them down, to actually seek to persuade these people, too stupid to realise that they're creating an environment that will harm them and their children, that by promising them the afterlife, somehow they might start behaving themselves in this life. And now that religion is in retreat, that contract, that promise doesn't work anymore. I honestly don't know. What do you think has changed? 0345 6060 973. What's happened to us? How in the space of 3 weeks have we gone from horror and fellow feeling and shock at the sight of that burning tower in North Kensington to somehow inhabiting a country where people think it's acceptable to pour scorn, derision and criticism on the survivors? But I just don't get it, and I wonder whether you do. What's changed in Britain? And someone's just pointed out that it's only 5 years when we were just about to start hosting the Olympics, welcoming every nationality into the in the world into this city with open arms. Do you remember that? 2012. It's only 5 years ago. Staggering. Nami is in North Kensington. Nami, what would you like to say?
James, I'm a first-time caller. You'll have to excuse me. I feel very emotional about this issue.
Of course, just forgive me, but if you just so in the interest of clarity, if you just get your phone a little bit nearer to your mouth, or
is that better?
That is better. Yeah, I just want to hear everything you have to say, Nami. I promise you.
James, I run a community association in North Kensington, and we're about 15 minutes to walk away from the Grenfell Tower site. So we've been working in partnership with the rest of the voluntary sector in trying to support residents from Grenfell Tower and those displaced from the surrounding area. In the first week to 10 days, we were involved in giving out immediate financial assistance, and also, new donations, everything from the clothing and underwear through to Chelsea kits for children who had lost their favourite things in the fire. And also, because of my role, I sit on various meetings and networks and receiving briefings that are clogging up my inbox every day. And I think when I go home at night and I read the newspapers and watch the news, what is being reported are headlines. So I'm hearing that Gold Command have taken over. I'm hearing that there are significant sums of money available to people. And of course, most recently, that everyone would be, given an offer of accommodation. And the message that comes through the media because of these headlines is one of a situation which is now more stable and being managed more effectively. But on the ground, it's very difficult to describe, James. There's still so much chaos and misinformation, and these families are so incredibly vulnerable. Some of them have just been released from hospital. They have all lost friends and family. They're not sleeping. I mean, I'm struggling. My staff are struggling. Our volunteers are struggling. We're all having nightmares. How much more so people who are actually living in the tower. And I think housing is a very basic need, and it's completely inappropriate with the level of chaos and miscommunication to expect people to be able to make snap decisions.
They've got post-traumatic stress disorder, and they're being asked to make decisions that will affect the next 2 or 3 decades of their and their children's lives.
Absolutely.
And they're being criticised and condemned by British people, by British residents for not just accepting whatever bone they're thrown. I don't get it anymore, Naomi, do you?
They are, and it's so very sad. I really feel like the scales have fallen from my eyes.
Yes.
I've worked in Kensington and Chelsea for a long time for the voluntary sector, and we are a secure voluntary sector, reasonably well funded, well organised. We have networks and forums, and the Royal Borough has played kind of a paternalistic role in helping us coordinate activities. But when this happened, we were on our own. We were absolutely on our own, and from even giving out the emergency financial assistance, I was ashamed of myself as someone, who has a long career of community development and community work, and I was ashamed that people were having to walk or travel from hospitals or from hotels to my centre in 34 degrees to collect £300. I felt, I'm still ashamed. I'm ashamed that I was part of that system and part of that process that made people feel like, why are people having to go from centre to centre? Why are
I can process
forms which are then lost? I
can process incompetence. And I can process ignorance, but I can't process pride in callousness. And that is the subtext of what you're saying, the people walking to pick up £300 because they actually currently have zero pence, £0 in their pockets. The actual paper money that they had would have gone up in flames in the tower as they were running for the door. And yet people now, and it's not just social media, people are queuing up to somehow suggest that they're all scroungers or they're all lucky. That's the word, isn't it? Some people seem to think the survivors of the Grenfell Tower tragedy are lucky in the sense of what they're now being offered, rather than being bloody lucky that they didn't die in the fire.
But they're not. With the housing issue, the offers are being made. They are temporary accommodations. So if people have 2 and 3 children in school where art therapy and child psychologists have already started working with children, it's completely inappropriate to expect them to leave.
But it's so obvious what you say. What do you think's happened? I mean, do you share my idealism, optimism that 5-10 years ago this simply wouldn't have happened? Something's shifted in the national consciousness that is deeply, deeply ugly, and this is the worst manifestation of it I've ever seen.
James, I don't have any answers. No. I've just called to confirm that the problem is real. People are very, very vulnerable. What they need is compassion, they need humanity, they need person-centred services, and they need time to make decisions at their own pace and not at the whim of a government that feels like it needs to do things and make a statement by a certain date.
Yes, you're right. I mean, you can see why she did that, but obviously, unless she was 100% certain that everything she pledged she'd be able to do within 3 weeks was deliverable, she shouldn't have said it. She should have just said it. We will take as long. Actually, it's more reassuring to say we will stay on this for as long as it takes, not we'll be done and dusted by a week next Tuesday.
Of course it is, and a conversation like that will take us, we'll work on this for as long as it takes. That's the kind of conversation that allows people to breathe and their shoulders to drop and their, relieves a little bit of tension and anxiety. I mean, I think Theresa May's pronouncement was well-meaning, but when that filters through several layers of bureaucracy, what it means is that people are being made offers and they're not given any clarity as to what the service charges might be in these luxury flats, what the council tax might be, what might happen to them after that.
And a lot of the offers are temporary as well, aren't they? Yes.
They're all temporary. I wouldn't accept it myself.
And the subtext seems to be, I mean, if you try and explore the logic of the bile duct, it seems to be that because they've got so little taken away from them by tragedy and possibly by incompetence, a manslaughter charge has been considered, which leaves the door open to an even uglier question. And because they've got so little, they should somehow be grateful for whatever crumbs fall from the council's table. It just makes no sense.
No, it doesn't. It is so incredibly sad. It really is.
And yet
It's
many
horrible to witness.
people are telling me they saw it coming. They knew it would happen because this is what modern Britain has somehow been allowed to become. Naomi, thank you. And thank you for the work that you're doing on behalf of people who you would just have presumed 3 weeks ago were about to receive the mother of all support from every single person in the country. But no, something's happened to Great Britain. And when your home has burnt down, when your neighbours have been killed, when your existence has been utterly obliterated, you turn to people in this country, and what do you get in return? Hate. I wonder whether it's partly because so many people are struggling. So many people feel a lot worse off than they feel they should be. We're the only country in the civilized world that has economic growth with wage stagnation. We now have the lowest level of economic growth in the first 3 months of the year of any country in the European Union. Leaving Brexit aside, we're all on a hiding to nothing economically in the coming couple of years. All of the evidence is incontrovertible on that. So if you lean to the right wing of politics, where are you now? You're having some sort of... it's almost like an existential psychodrama. You've supported all of these policies for, 10 years, 20, 30, 40 years? And it's turned the country into a place where economic growth doesn't reach workers. Economic growth just goes to shareholders and owners. But you've supported it because you thought you were going to be a winner, because you think that all people on benefits are scroungers. You've supported it. And where does that leave you? Because you're not going to turn around and say, I've made an epic mistake for all of my adult life. Politically, I've been on the side of the mill owners and the master sweeps, the shareholders and the owners. Because I don't know why, I just thought I was on their side. I didn't want to be on the same side as the scroungers and the layabouts and the flat screen TV single mothers. So then if you're looking at what's happened to the country, sort of decades, post-79, decades of a left-right divide that lent very heavily towards the right wing. And this is where it's brought us. So where are you going to direct your anger? Where are you going to direct your hate? You can't direct it at yourself. You can't direct it at the people actually responsible for the socio-economic model we've created, because that's you. So who are you going to direct it at? To which the answer seems to be, what have you got? Who have you got? Seriously, anyone. Ideally foreigners, but social housing tenants, yeah, anyone at all. I'm going to get angry with them, because the alternative is the truth. And the truth is I should be angry with myself. I voted, I argued for this sort of society. I don't know, it's just a theory. I'm putting it out there. I'd be welcome to hear yours. 0345 6060973. How have we become a country that can look at the survivors of Grenfell Tower and start sneering? You've even got people who appear on Question Time, a programme that used to be the sort of gold standard of discussion in this country. I've just politely declined their invitation to come on it because I'm not a pantomime performer. You look at people who've appeared on Question Time are calling for some of these families to be deported. There isn't even any evidence yet of illegal immigration. There will be. There's bound to be. There is in every major conurbation on the planet. There'll be illegal immigration. Every desirable, successful society attracts people, some of whom are allowed to come here, some of whom aren't, but sneak in anyway. It's not exactly rocket science or particularly shocking. And you've got people who appear on a programme like Question Time actually calling for them to be deported. Might have just lost a family member. Everything they've ever owned has gone up in smoke. All the stuff they'd worked to collect. Just the little trappings of civilization that they'd surrounded themselves with in their flat. All gone. All gone. Close their eyes at night, they can smell the smoke. Deport them. That's what we've become. And some people still say that we're improving our society. It's 10:46. You pay your money, it takes your chances, except you don't in Kensington and Chelsea, it would seem. You pay your tax, you pay your council tax, you pay your income tax, in expectation that if something awful happens, the people affected will be looked after. And for the record, if I lived next door to somebody that wasn't paying tax and their house burnt down, I'd be quite happy for my tax money to be used to pay the firefighters and provide the appliances that would see them rescued from their burning home. I don't think that makes me special, but it certainly feels sometimes as if you're swimming against the tide in modern Britain when you suggest that reacting to the plight of Grenfell Tower survivors with anything other than love, warmth and compassion, and I'll throw in Christianity again, just to remind all those people who usually bang on about how our Christian values are under threat, that the polar opposite of Christian values is what is currently being displayed by significant swathes of the country towards people who have endured unimaginable horror. We finally, after being on air for 52 minutes, found ourselves a question to ask, which is this. I believe that 5 years ago, the reaction would not have been like this. People would not have felt compelled to boast about how hateful and callous they are. They were still ashamed and embarrassed. Something has happened in the last 5 years that means what was once too shameful to publicly expose is now a subject of pride. It's the fetishization of cruelty, and it seems to be built upon a hard right, a far right, a fascistic casting of other people as somehow inherently inferior. The Untermensch, if you will, to coin the Nazi ideology. That's where it seems to be coming from, and it's bogus, like all fascistic ideology is, but it begs this question: why have people become so disillusioned and so unsatisfied and unfulfilled that they can be persuaded to take out all of their negativity and anger on the, well, I think we could probably loosely describe the Grenfell Tower survivors as currently being among the single most vulnerable group of people in this country at this moment. I guess it's all part of a process. When we start talking about refugees as if their lives are worthless, we start lionising claims that we should let them drown, we start speaking about them and sticking them on posters in a way that portrays them as somehow being less than human, somehow different from you and me, in some fundamental, meaningful way. And once that genie's out of the bottle, I don't think you get to control where it goes next. So now it's the survivors of Grenfell Tower who are being maligned, abused and condemned. I can't quite get my head around it. David's in Hammersmith. David, what would you like to say?
Hiya, James.
Hello, mate.
To give you it's a bit of a difficult one, a little bit of background.
Yes.
Born and raised in North Kensington for over 40 plus years. I live around the corner in Shepherd's Bush now. I've got some very close friends that got out of Grenfell Tower, some friends and associates that got out, and one or two that didn't make it.
Gosh, I'm sorry.
You were talking about children, how they cry at night and playing with second-hand toys, but also when they close their eyes and try and sleep, they have to have the images of stepping over dead bodies as they were trying to fight their way through smoke to get out of the tower block. I could tell you many stories. Every one of them are heartbreaking, but it's not my story, and I don't feel it's for me to really tell it.
Fair enough.
To the point what you're talking about today, it isn't a surprise, really. I don't think it's a surprise to you or to me, because I say we because I listen to you quite a lot talk about this subject in many different guises, many different days.
Yeah.
And in the first week of Grenfell down there, towards the end of the first week, that was the talk on the ground. The talk on the ground was how many more bodies were in there and how long before they desperately get this off the front pages and start turning onto another story, putting it onto, these Grenfell people, they should be grateful that, as I haven't seen the headlines on the papers, I don't tend to read them if I'm honest with you.
Sure.
But I'm saying it's the headlines along of, look, we've offered them a flat, they should be grateful. What more do these people want? And then you say you get these ones on the extreme right, they'll be popping up now every so often saying, look at these people, they should be grateful. What more?
Yeah.
You get people doing it, and then it starts coming into the papers and the headlines, and then it starts getting people turning on each other, looking around saying, well, you've been offered a new flat, why don't you take it? Or you've been given X amount of money, you should be grateful.
Yeah.
But you need to stop and think what these people have lost and gone through.
But it beggars belief that even needs to be said out loud, doesn't it, David? It beggars belief. Yeah. And then when they do stop and think, it doesn't seem to persuade many of them from the path they've elected to follow.
Do you know, this is going to sound really basic, but there's one thing that always comes to the back of my mind, and I'd like to claim it as my own, but you've probably heard it once or twice before.
Go on.
It comes back to the cookie analogy. When you talk about how they divide it, and you've got that one person saying, or the people saying, don't worry about me with £300 million in our Kensington and Chelsea coffers. Look at them. We've offered them a flat. We've given them somewhere else. Never look at what we've got. there seems to be a formula that they found that succeeds. We can get certain areas or certain communities turning on each other. We can almost do what we want. And I don't want to turn this into a political conversation, but
you can if you want.
I think people are slowly waking up to it.
Do you?
Yeah, I do, because they got the shock of their lives. Jeremy Corbyn, whether you love him or hate him, I'm not supporting or defending anybody.
Sure.
People are just tired of what they deem to be lies. Should be grateful. You know, we're all in this together. What a line that is in history. We're all in that together, austerity. It sticks in the back of your throat that these people will look you in the eye and tell you it. You know, everybody in the community and around the country came to help. The people in charge of Kensington and Chelsea never did.
No, they were AWOL for 8 days. And then when they came back, they refused to conduct the conversation in public because there were some pesky journalists present. I mean, you're leading us slightly off the path. What do you think, from your perspective, what's changed? And I'm putting a 5-year window on it. I mean, it's an arbitrary number that I've sort of plucked out of the sky. What do you think? Anything has changed, or do you think it was always like this? We just maybe didn't realise, or that these people were always there and they just kept their own counsel?
I think there's a bit of both. I think now with social media, which I'm not really into, but where people are there, they're recording what's happened as they see it. They're talking about it as they see it. Whereas if you go back to the tragedy from 30 years ago, where people just had to rely on newspapers or what they saw on the news. And again, if you had to rely on and I'm a big fan of the news, what you see some of the news on some of the papers, you would read, look at these people. They're getting X amount of money and they're getting offered a new flat. What more do they want? But you have to understand what they've lost. These are people that cried out for help for years, and no one's ever helped them.
And by help, you know, I suppose
we're here to help you.
You put it through the mangle of the right-wing media, and help becomes handouts.
Yeah, but they're not asking for money. They're telling you you're putting us in a place where it's unsafe to live. We're telling you that this place is going to go up in fire, and everything they told you has come true.
You know, you've reminded me of something else. So the people that they told that their homes were unsafe are the people offering them new homes, and they're getting it in the neck for saying we might not want to move to that one just yet, or
they're saying we're here to look after you, but we've been asking you for years. And even when the tragedy happened and we needed help, you weren't here. You just weren't. Everybody else was. Everybody that had something or nothing came.
Well, that's the silver lining. That's the thing that I think gives you and me and everybody and most people hope, is that the community responded in the way that you would expect a community to respond. And there is a community. David will know better than I do. There is a genuine sense of community in that part of London. And yet the expectation from government, the contract with government, been completely breached, completely broken, and I don't think either of us know why. I think it's about love. Do you think it is a sort of, the less love you've had in your life, the harder you find it to show love to others? I'm sort of desperately searching around for simple answers to complicated questions, which flies in the face of our normal modus operandi on this programme. But even against the backdrop of the last couple of years, even against the backdrop of the rewards and the renown being heaped upon people who are, I mean, by any objective measure, simply racist liars, sort of cast in the role of folk heroes. And you try to work out why so many people love the message of hate. Hate them. Hate her. Hate him. Is it just because they don't have much love in their life? Or they don't love themselves? I don't know. I'm thinking out loud, and thankfully you're joining in. There's a couple of phone lines free, 0345 606 0973. If you're just tuning in and you're wondering what's prompted this existential psychodrama, very simply, it's the almost unbelievable scorn being directed at. And, I mean, even now I'm doing a double take, an hour into the conversation, directed at survivors of the Grenfell Tower fire. Survivors who in many cases have turned down the original offers of temporary accommodation because they want permanent accommodation, or in some cases because the accommodation is utterly inappropriate. Some even offered flats in tower blocks. It's not even a conversation about evidence or facts, this. It's a conversation about the most fundamental of values. And where have ours gone? Where have they gone? 0345 606 0973. John's in Camden. John, what's happened? What's happened to our country?
I'm not saying I've got all the answers at all. It's such a huge subject.
Of course.
I do think this is pre-programming. I think that there's sort of three facets that are involved. One is the media has managed or helped to demonise other human beings. You've got programs that have people at the poor end of society going on to make a couple of quid, and that's entertainment for other people. It dehumanises, devalues individuals, and then
you mean like Benefit Street, that kind of.
Yeah, exactly
the poverty porn, as it's called sometimes.
Exactly,
yes.
It's disgusting. You're just you're making entertainment for people to watch other people's the worst parts, the lowest parts of their life.
Yes,
and it creates a society where we don't empathise with anyone. We want to see what the bailiff's going to do. We don't look and go, oh my gosh, what's happened to that person? We are. I think we, as a society, have been just programmed to, have no empathy for our fellow human being, and it comes from the top fundamentally, because the government, and again I will politicise this because I think this is all political.
Yes,
the government do everything they can to make one person question another. It's one person saying, well, I don't get this, why should you? It's like a race to the bottom, not a race to the top. And we should all be in a better position. Sorry, Joe.
No, you're making a lot more sense than I am. I've had plenty of time this morning. Can you trace it though, John? Can you see where it's sort of began to shift? Because I didn't grow up in a country like this. I grew up in the 70s, You had sort of Alf Garnett on the telly. We'd made progress for 25, 30 years, and then something's happened recently. From where I'm sitting, it seems to have done.
I think social media plays a part because fundamentally everyone's got an opinion now. Everyone's a celebrity. You got 300 likes. Some of these people are putting, Britain First on their Facebook and getting 50, 60 likes and not even realising that they're racist. They're being racist.
Sure.
It's ridiculous.
There's a dopamine hit. I mean, we might be overthinking it, but there is actually a release of adrenaline and an endorphin in your brain, apparently, when you see that you've had a post that's been liked, when you've had someone's clicked on it and enjoyed it. You get some, that's why they check constantly. And we all do it. It's just I'm a little bit baffled by people who post the most vile thing they can think of and then get a kick out of people.
It gives value to horrid opinions, and this is what happens when you get people criticising these poor, disgustingly treated poor people in Grenfell.
Yeah.
These human, I use the word loosely, these human beings feel it's their right to have disgusting opinions and voice them, not having them living in the same block, not having them near them like this.
And you know what? This is an elephant in the room, isn't there? Because I can't really sit here and condemn ordinary members of the public for celebrating the dissemination and of their vile views when you could get offered a show on LBC for being publicly vile. It goes right from the bottom of society to the top. Not that this is necessarily the top of society, but if you see people on the telly and on the radio saying stuff that 5 years ago would have been unacceptable, you can't blame other people for repeating it on Facebook.
No, of course, it's programming. It's programming through mainstream media, newspapers. I'm a firefighter. I'm a London firefighter, and I don't want to talk about the incidents of late, but I have experienced being demonised in the 2003 our pay request in 2003. We were demonised by the papers. There were lies about us, things that were completely untrue coming out. Slurs, slander. They were picking on individuals, saying, why they got a second job. They got a second job because they can't afford to make their way on their first job. I mean, I was on something. I mean, it's ridiculous. I don't want to go into money, but I experienced firsthand the lies that they're capable of. I'm sure most celebrities are out there. That's why they don't read the mainstream papers. That's why they don't watch the news, because a lot of it is just lies and it's made up stories.
If someone tells you, you've second guessed my next question. Actually, you've got to wonder who it's suiting, because I still subscribe to the school of thought that possibly puts the cart before the horse. And if there's a public appetite for this kind of biliousness, then commercial organisations, whether newspapers or radio stations, they're going to put the biliousness on air, or they're going to put the biliousness on the front page. But that was true 10 years ago. And social media is the only thing that's changed in the intervening period, isn't it? In that it's provided everybody with a form of loud hailer. And then you've had that simultaneous calls for a perfect example of a phrase no one properly understands the meaning of. They say political correctness. What that meant, from where I'm sitting today, when people complained about political correctness, what they meant was, I'd really like to start slagging off those people whose homes have just burnt down, because I think some of them might be foreign, but I'm not allowed to slag them off because other people will look down their nose at me and call me a scumbag.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's two other differences. Sorry, I don't want to take up all your time.
Take all the time you want, John.
What one difference is that while you've got the little people fighting each other, you know, and that's not my words, that's how I feel that we are perceived, the people that have-nots, let's say, while they're fighting each other, you're not looking at what the top people are doing. You're not taking any notice. It's a divide and conquer that's really at the heart of it, and I'm sorry, it's just I find it abhorrent. I find what people are saying abhorrent. How we treat our society, how the government are managed to treat the society, treat these people, and you know, once it's out of the news, once it's off the front pages, they're home and scot-free. You know, once I can say it's a public inquiry, I'm a politician, I can't really comment on it now. It's your get out of jail free card. And what's happening with these people is they don't trust anyone. And they're so right to not trust anyone, because they have been lied to, they've been cheated, they've been ignored, they've been, you know, why should they trust anyone? If someone says, I'm going to offer you a house and it's perfectly safe and it's permanent, why should they trust them? They've been lied, and these people have got nothing for it, you know. On top of that, they've lost family members, children, and on top of that, they are being, you know, absolutely lied to. And I just think there's a bigger group now that are realising that we are being lied to, and we are being cheated, and we are being ignored. And I hope it gets bigger. I hope the people who realise get bigger.
Well, yes, it's the second caller in a row expressing a degree of optimism that things are changing. I hope it's contagious, John.
I do. I really do. Because I think we need a change, and I think, you know, it's an example that, you know, I'm not going to champion Jeremy Corbyn, but he is for a lot of people, and for the youth that have been disenfranchised, because they are made to feel like second-class citizens, that they shouldn't have opinion because they haven't lived long enough, they haven't done this, they haven't done that. They see the opportunity to have their voice heard and to change, and whether it'll happen or not, these people want to vote for the chance. They're not voting because, you know, they're guaranteeing that everything in the manifesto is going to come true. They're voting because they are hoping. If someone doesn't say they're going to support the NHS, it's never going to happen. You know, if the Tories say
so you're not going to get a fully costed detail. Costed isn't quite the right word to use, actually, but you just it's a howl of frustration and a belief that things must be possible for things to be different. But then at the other side of the coin, an awful lot of the people who live on bile and hate now are probably not a million miles away from that position themselves. It's just that instead of taking aim at the people who have created the society in which they have, in their own minds, failed to live up to their own expectations, the reason why their life hasn't gone according to how they feel it should have done, they're blaming poor people. They're blaming the people below them instead of blaming the people above them.
Because they're and also the other point I was going to make is because they're so worried about survival themselves.
Yes.
That the only reaction they have is to hate on their fellow man and continue to be so busy, because they're so busy trying to make their own bills and make their own struggles, that it almost seems anyone else who's getting any sort of perceived help, and trust me, it probably isn't that helpful.
Sure.
They're getting something that someone else isn't. But no, listen, we are all in it together. The little people are all in it together. Not the government. We're all in it together. We are all in it together. The sooner people realise that, the sooner we can turn this massive oil tank around and point it in the direction for us all improving.
For everyone
our lives,
on board, for everyone on board to improve their circumstances rather than just the people on the bridge. John, I mean, no one listening to the programme on a regular basis is going to be surprised to learn that I was nodding along vigorously with everything you said, but I'll say one thing again, and that is I hope your optimism is contagious, because right now I haven't caught it. It's 11:15. And I couldn't work out what was bothering me while John was talking. A lot of love for John, a firefighter on just before the travel news, describing or trying to help me come to a better understanding of what's happened to our country, how we've ended up in a place where within 3 weeks of watching everything they own go up in smoke and hearing perhaps the screams of their neighbours as they died in the fire, residents of Grenfell Tower are being treated to bile, disapproval and condemnation by some British people, by some British residents, and I don't get it. Even by the standards of recent history, it's a level of callousness and almost fetishistic hate that has taken my breath away, actually. And John was trying to very successfully answer some of those questions, and throughout the call there was something niggling me in the back of my mind, and I know what it was. It was that if you are on the other side of this fence, if you have been radicalised effectively by right-wing media and turned into somebody that thinks all the problems in your life are the fault of that brown person over there or that social housing tenant over there, then that doesn't compute, because that was a firefighter talking. And yes, they get demonised by the same radicalising right-wing media whenever they dare to suggest that the terms and conditions that they signed up for at the beginning of their careers should be retained until the end of their careers. God damn them. But it's supposed to be lovies and pop stars and BBC journalists. They're supposed to be the only ones who describe injustice. It's not supposed to be firefighters, is it? That's the thing. It's supposed to be very easy targets. That's what they do. Anybody who disagrees with the way that this is how things have to be, and the only reason why I haven't got as much money as I think I deserve is because they're giving it all to poor people, they're giving it all to immigrants, they're giving it all to asylum seekers, they're giving it all to refugees. They're not, of course. They're giving it all to chairmen of the board, they're giving it all to shareholders, they're giving it all to institutional investors and hedge funds. But they don't want you to know that. They want you to believe that the reason why you live in the only country in the civilized world where economic growth does not translate into wage growth, the economy grows. They keep telling us it's so important that the economy grows, but the wages don't. But they don't want anybody to actually start pointing out that it's the boss's fault that you're not getting paid enough. They want it to be the Polish plasterer's fault that you're not getting paid enough. Doesn't matter how many papers are published, everywhere from the London School of Economics to the Bank of England, talking about how wage compression is infinitesimal impact upon working people. In Germany, more immigration than us, wages have gone up by 14%. But we've allowed ourselves, and that's why Brexit's part of the process, I think. Because the more you look overseas, the more you look abroad, the more you realise that things don't have to be like this. And I still believe, in my heart of hearts, that 5 years ago, if a tower block had burnt down with a loss of 80 and almost certainly more lives, we would not have been queuing up to pour scorn upon the survivors and deride their decision not to move into whatever accommodation they've been offered in the first instance by precisely the same local authority that they consider to be responsible for the deaths of their neighbours. But it's the foreign angle as well. It's not by any means true that everybody who lived there was born somewhere else. I saw Sadiq Khan last week. He'd been at a funeral that day of a gentleman in his 70s who'd lived in North Kensington all of his life and who died on, I think, the 16th floor of the tower block. And it's just got out there, hasn't it? This sort of post... What's the word I'm looking for? This idea, it's perfectly acceptable to be absolutely vile about anybody based upon their ethnic origin. Stick it on a poster. Stick it in a manifesto. And once that's out, once that genie's out of the bottle, all you have to do in the context of Grenfell Tower for this sort of chomping herd of furious, unhappy, loveless people, all you have to do is just insert the word immigration into the debate and suddenly all sympathy for the survivors of the fire disappears. Throw in illegal immigration, which is almost certainly pertinent to the bigger picture, but it certainly doesn't apply to any of the people who've been offered housing thus far. Throw that into the picture and they cease to be human. And once you can somehow diminish or dilute their humanity, all bets are off. That's how Holocausts happen. They're less human than we are. Untermensch. And it's happening. You can laugh at me. I'll be happy to enjoy your laughter, but you cannot look at what I'm looking at and deny it. It's happening. Trying to cast fellow human beings as somehow fundamentally inferior, whether it's due to their immigration status or whether it's due to their country of origin. They're just somehow less human than the rest of us. Except, of course, they're not. And once you open the door to that definition of other people as being somehow less human, nothing to stop you being next. Christian's in Heathrow. Christian, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Thanks for taking the call. I see myself as reasonably connected to the Grenfell issue. Like you, it struck an emotional chord, and there's a literal connection as well. Are you getting an echo on the line, or is it just me?
That's all good. It's just you. Just okay, ignore it if you can. It's not bothering me.
No, of course, yeah, I'll press on.
Thank you.
I was hoping to offer a stance on the past, present and future of this question you've raised of, are we becoming less kind-hearted as a nation? I was sitting down having dinner with my girlfriend about a week ago, and we were saying how proud we used to be of being different from the US.
Yes.
And you can't cast a total aspersion, but we saw in the US a race relations difficulty that was more profound than our own here in the UK. You had Katrina. There were always stories about the police harming or murdering black people in the pursuit of crime prevention. And then, of course, over here in just the last 3 weeks, you're actually no further forward than we thought we were. We were just either buying into a lie or some choreography that's taken place to make us believe that we're further forward, or we've very, very suddenly gone backwards. And that's to the tune of what you were saying in your
could it be seeds? Could it be that the seeds are always there, but only when they get watered do they sprout? That was sounding a little bit Alan Partridgey.
No. Aha! I personally think you're exactly right.
Oh,
I think it was always there, and whether it's Trump and May, for the record, I'm not party political, it's just a comment, whether it's they've offered a license to anti-immigration sentiment under the banner of free speech, or whether it's something else, I think people who sit right of centre, or very right of centre maybe, feel able to say these things. Political correctness has maybe died away, and that, like you say,
but by which you mean common decency. When you say political correctness in that context, you mean common decency, good manners for thick people.
But, well, maybe, but I think this stuff was always there, and it's been hidden from us. And we thought, Kirsty and I, that we were so much further forward, and we're just not.
Well, I still think we are. I think that the American backdrop is so intrinsically linked to slavery, which is within living memory in America, and which is, in many ways, the definition of the Untermensch, isn't it? The definition of having somebody next to you who you consider to be less human than you are. That it underpins that the psychosis on that wing of the Republican Party. But I don't think we're like that. I think we have.
I hope not.
Well, I hope not as well. But I mean, it's not an argument. You can offer anything you want.
I'll offer some commentary on the future. I post on social media, not a lot, to be fair, but I've tried to keep the Grenfell story alive, because what we know about the mainstream media is they've reported the story in reverse. So when everyone was dying in their homes, burning alive, they swooped in with helicopters, got their footage, then they got footage of people crying, and then they sodded off. Whereas for me, the real story is the other way around. I took very little interest initially because it was a circus, and now my interest is enormous because there's a massive scandal lying behind it. You know, £5 million for rich people's opera, but no money for people's proper housing, for example. It's a political issue, clearly. And I posted on Instagram a statement that the £1 billion that May gave to the DUP could have bought 4,500 sprinkler systems. And straight after, I got a lot of unfollows, if you know the parlance, James.
Yes, I do.
And I've got the app that tells me who the unfollowers are, and they're all my university peers, and I went to a good university. What struck me as interesting was that all these privileged kids, and I'm sorry, but they are privileged.
Yes, of course. Yes.
All these privileged people that unfollowed me because they found my post unpalatable or inconsistent with their own views. Tell me, James, who are they in the next 20 years?
Well,
the CEOs and leaders of our country.
Well, you might have a particularly unpleasant bunch of mates, Christian. There is always that possibility. I kind of derive some optimism from social media when it's.
I'd like to think that's the case, but it seems to me at the moment, because I see this pan social media, because I'm in touch with people on the ground there at Lancaster West. The privileged and the Tory voters, and I emphasise I'm not necessarily party political, don't want to see the dark side of the issues that sit behind Grenfell.
Well, I know a lot of Conservative voters and Conservative politicians who are just as profoundly distressed by events there as you are, but certainly in the context of Kensington and Chelsea Borough Council, you can't help thinking that out of sight, out of mind was operating somewhere on their radar. You're doing some work down there, are you? You're doing some...
Yeah, nothing that compares to the work of firefighters or volunteers, but I'm attached to North Kensington Law Centre, and I have my first session on the 10th of July. So, it's just at the risk of sounding like a bleeding heart, you just try and help where you can.
Well, see, again, even there, you see, you've been radicalised or brainwashed yourself in the fact that when you're just describing yourself as doing something very worthy and important, you feel the need to qualify it by saying you're not a bleeding heart. And I do the same thing. That's why I mention it. I can spot the symptoms in other people. That's what happens when the Overton window shifts. The parameters of acceptable conversation shift. Someone else has put it even better about a conversation of what were once called liberal values are now called liberal attributes that the population is designed to look down on. Decency, compassion, tolerance, all of these things are signs of snowflakery. And Andre goes even further. You bet it's happening in Portsmouth, where a councillor has described the city's homeless people as human detritus that needs to be cleared off our streets. It's slowly happening, whether or not it's a deliberate attempt to sort of turn the population in on itself, or whether it is just about clicks and giggles. I don't know anymore, but it's happening, and everyone can see it, except those that don't want to, and there are none so blind as those that don't want to see. Not just that councillor in Portsmouth describing homeless people as detritus. There is a story of a Conservative mayor who has, I think, stepped down after joking on Facebook about brown people being like dogs. And you recognise when you read these stories, in relatively mainstream political circles now, not on the sort of weird fringes to which they used to be confined when that dreadful thing, political correctness, told people like that their views were unacceptable in polite and civilised society. You realise how it's moving. And I'm just wondering what's prompted that move. What's made that change? Why have we allowed ourselves to become de-civilised? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. 11:36 is the time. Chris is in Shaftesbury. Chris, what would you like to say?
Oh, hello there, James. Good to speak to you again.
Likewise.
Thank God for your evidence, fact and empathy, otherwise we'd be right in pickle. Now, cast your mind back to when we were, because I spoke on the phone to you about wealth, who's rich, who's not, and the divide between. And we discussed that if you were poorer, people didn't want to admit that they were poor, and people that were better off didn't want to admit that they were in the higher band. You see where I'm going with this?
Yes. Well, no, I don't. I'm remembering what's in the rearview mirror. Yes, yeah. I do.
Sorry, James. Yeah, sorry. I feel it's relevant because it is, to me, the social mood of Britain. Now, everyone seems to think that they are not doing so well, which means that when you see things in the media about people getting handouts, regardless of their position and situation, they held them in contempt.
Yes. There's envy involved as well. It's not so much, I wish my house had burnt down and I was being offered a new flat. It's more, why are they being offered stuff when I've got so little?
Exactly. That's how I kind of feel. So you can't help as a human being to go, oh, I would really like a little couple of grand handout right now. That would really do me some good. Yeah. But initially, people, of course, felt sympathy for the people in the Grenfell Tower. But now that it's 3 weeks later and we're getting these other conversations come through, people are starting to turn the other way. I can't help but feel that, like I said, it's the social mood.
Yes. No, I don't argue with that. There is a social mood, but I don't think it was like this 10 or 5 years ago. I could be wrong. I mean, I can't think of a comparable tragedy, and terrorist atrocities aren't the same, because the response to that, although that started changing as well now. People have started telling us that you're not allowed to try to come together and be unified in your outrage and your response to a terror attack. People are trying to tell other people that they shouldn't have vigils or they shouldn't light candles. Everything's changing.
It brings me nicely on to my next point, which is about patriotism. There seems to be a yearning for patriotism in Britain, but we don't seem to have that. And we turn to these little distractions like fish, blue passports, saboteurs, all these kind of things that we turn to try and feel a little bit patriotic, and it's the wrong way of doing it.
But patriotism is about people. Patriotism is about looking after your neighbours. I always thought.
We're not doing that.
Well, clearly not.
We're not doing that. No, yeah, exactly. That's my point. But and I kind of feel like figures like Theresa May, who is the figurehead of the ship, by meaning she's wooden and moving. She hasn't got the patriotic feel about her as our leader of a country. No one's standing up behind her like we did with Margaret Thatcher when we marched into the Falklands. Everyone felt patriotic at that time. You know, and there was a surge of patriotism in the country, but we haven't got that at the moment. But so why? We're not.
Well, we haven't had any of our sovereign territory invaded by a foreign power. Is the short answer to that, Chris?
I concede to that. I concede to that, James. But you see the kind of analogy I'm trying to.
I do, but why can't we translate what you describe as patriotism? And I mean, crikey, bigger brains than mine have wrestled with the inadequacy of that word over the years. But why can't I? I think I'm at my most patriotic, for want of a better word, when I speak about the emergency services, or when I speak about the public sector, when I speak about the health service. The things that make me proudest of Great Britain, proudest to be British, are built upon that principle of doing things for each other. You know, that the most pure of principles is probably the health service being free at the point of care for everybody who needs it, even though it means some people will pay a lot more in tax than other people do, and the person who didn't pay much might get cancer, and the person who paid loads may never even get a cough. That's what makes me patriotic. I don't want it just to be focused on foreign wars and focused on, you know, maligning foreigners, whether they're at war with us or not. I don't know what's changed, and I don't know that patriotism. Yes, well, we're all groping in the dark.
Yeah, exactly. It's just. But it's that loss. It's that kind of loss of what patriotism means, perhaps. But you said yourself just then that you have a lot of feelings of patriotism towards our...
Well, just pride. I don't even know that I like...
Yeah, and all pride. But you've only got to look at the media, like they had the fireman on earlier on, who said that when they put forward the pay increase, trying to do all that... the public were treating them in contempt.
At the behest of the media, again, that's what we keep coming back to. And it's the same media now who use patriotism as a sort of lazy bucket into which to throw all criticism of foreigners or all fear of strangers, all anti-EU myths. It's all dressed up as patriotism, whereas in fact what the people telling us to be more patriotic are doing are encouraging us to tear our country apart at the very seams. Okay, Chris, thank you. I don't, you know, ever stop ringing in and wrestling with the big stuff, because none of us have got simple answers. It's the belief that simple answers are available to complicated questions that's at the root of many of the problems we're exploring. Kurt's in Chelsea. Kurt, what would you like to say?
How you going, James?
All good, Kurt. What's on your mind?
Well, I'm a local res from around the area. I went to primary school even on the same road as Grenfell. It's heartbreaking what's happened up there. My love to all those survivors and bless the dead that still haven't been buried down there. It's always been a racial issue down there. It's always been a racial issue down there since you could go right back to the 50s when Caribbean immigrants were getting kicked around down there. You could bring that right up to the 80s, when there's no black people in Notting Hill, the movie. You could bring it right up to...
Would you go that... Would you really? I mean, I'm not here to tell you your experience is untrue. But is that... I mean, just off the top of my head, is there really no black people in Notting Hill, the movie?
No. They were They were the security behind the cameras, mate.
Is that right? I wouldn't clock that, but I can see why you did. I mean, and of course, go back even further, and the race riots kicked up less than a mile up the road from Grenfell Tower, didn't they?
The biggest thing in Notting Hill was never even mentioned in the movie, which was the carnival. Anyway, it's always been like a little ghetto down there. What they've done down there is basically pushed black and brown and ethnics all into one little corner of Notting Hill.
And white.
A few. What they've tended to do is more put the poor in that one area. And,
yes, exactly. And the poverty is colourblind.
Yeah, and the people that have not been listened to, they've not been invested in. There's no help after the event. There's scant answers. Even today, they don't know where their relatives or dead are. You're telling me Britain, as a fifth largest economy, can go to Katrina and give help. We can go and help out Ebola. We can go to Haiti and do research there. You got guys on the box talking about 60 million years ago they found so and so fossil in so and so rock, and that is the ancestor of Mr. Monkey somewhere, right? And they can't go in that tower and see.
Oh, I see what you mean. They can find money for a whole list of things, but they couldn't find money for that. And there was money in the bank as well, so that kind of austerity justification doesn't wash at all. And that inequality is entrenched, I suppose. But it's what I'm confused by today is the reaction to the suffering, the reaction to the survivors. It's actually. I mean, can you believe that? Has it taken you by surprise briefly, Kirk? Because I'm late for the travel.
Well, two ways. It can go Britain getting bitter and jealous, but remember, those people are getting bitter. Some of your relatives live in those tower blocks as well. It can happen to you.
No, well, that's the point. That's the bit I don't get, is why empathy is so out of reach for people. I suppose if you're a forelock tugger, if you're essentially quite deferential, you have a choice when something like this happens. You either recognise that the ruling classes that you've sort of lionised and supported all of your life, and this is party political because it is very much a Conservative borough, albeit that it now has a Labour MP. I think she's coming in tomorrow. Either you recognise that they have let you down really badly, or you somehow try to find a way to get cross with the survivors of the fire instead. Is it that? Could it possibly be that simple? 0345 6060 973. It's 11:46. We'll do something a little bit different in the final hour of the programme. So after 12 o'clock, we'll be turning our attention to the upsurge in exorcisms in this country. I said to you at the outset this morning, every time these stories pop up, and they come along once or twice a year, I start off sniggering. And then as I snigger, I remember... I'm pretty sure I know which monk it was, but at the school I attended from the age of 13 to 18, it was attached to a Benedictine monastery, and there was one monk charged with exorcisms. It was his sort of field of response. I mean, it wasn't his main job, obviously. I think he was a geography teacher, but he had responsibility for exorcisms on the side. The idea that you can be possessed by evil spirits, possessed by the devil or a demon. It's in the Bible, eh? It's right there. It's in the New Testament as well, not just the Old Testament. So it's, Christianity. It contains room for exorcisms. Jesus did exorcisms. He cast out demons. And yet it does seem bonkers, doesn't it? In the 21st century. So we're going to have a chat about that. And I want to talk to you if you still believe in it, if you still think that this sort of thing is true. It's a booming... That's the word they've used in a report from a think tank, a religious think tank called Theos. It's a booming industry in the UK, driven partly by Christian migrant communities and partly, I suppose, by that historical pretext that I just provided you with. Before that, the grim question I've asked you today is what's happened to us all? How have we ended up in a place where it could even be considered vaguely acceptable to ask whether or not the survivors of the Grenfell Tower fire should be treated with anything other than compassion, warmth and love? The idea that the first offers of accommodation for them have been inadequate or inappropriate, or they remain temporary and these people want forever homes, The idea that the great British public, parts of it, could somehow be turned against survivors of the worst tragedy this country has endured in peacetime. I still don't get it, but something's changed. I refuse to believe that Britain has always been like this. Something's changed. I wonder what you think it is. Simon's in Forest Hill. Simon, what would you like to say?
Yeah, hi, James. Short time, first time. There's a conglomeration of things that have come together, I think, over the last few years. I was reading this morning the most chilling article in The Guardian, which was George Monbiot talking about this group called the Red Tape Initiative, who, as Grenfell burned, were looking to stitch up even more regressive health and safety.
A bonfire of regulations is what they called it during the Brexit campaign.
Pretty much it, yeah. And coupling that with several things that have been going on. Somebody touched on this free speech thing earlier on, and the way that we are informed through that section of the media that you and I probably distrust and dislike quite equally, who have led us to believe that political correctness is something that is madness now, that health and safety is something that is madness now, that we have a right to say what is on our minds and what we feel without any responsibility.
Or evidence, because that's the thing, that's the biggest lesson I've learned since starting here, actually, all those moons ago, is that people offer you a really strong opinion, and then you say, but in your own life, where's the evidence for that belief? And they go bonkers when they haven't got any. Yeah, but in your own life, do you know anyone who can't get their child into school? Have you ever been turned away from a hospital because it was full? Have you ever done this? Have you ever done that? What sector do you work in? No evidence at all.
Massive amounts of cultural, population, cognitive dissonance.
Yeah, huge.
We've got this. I've experienced it where people say something, and you'll say to them, "Hang on a minute." That not only is reprehensible and immoral and racist or misogynistic or misanthropic or whatever it is, and they say, "Yeah, but I have a right to say it. I have a right to say it."
And then we never get the question that never gets answered is why do you want to say it if it's not true and it's horrible? Why do you want to say it?
Because it feeds into a narrative that says, I'm not responsible for this, I don't want to be responsible for this, I don't want to be confronted by this because it's too difficult to think about, because we've talked about the economic situation with the pay caps for public sector workers and so on and so forth. Those people are struggling, a lot of people are struggling and wondering where this great economy that the UK is supposed to have is actually functioning. And the people who make it function that way, that 1%, are so hell-bent on retaining it that they're, I'm going to use tinfoil hat talk now, they're cronies in the press and so on and so forth, Daily Mail, Sun, etc., feed that narrative. I don't know how, and it's my world that you describe. I don't know how deliberate it is. I don't think people are sitting there, not many of them anyway, are sitting there at night thinking, what can I do tomorrow to sow more division and hatred among people? How can I get people to carry on blaming, cleaners and plasterers for the fact that they're not rich? How can I stop them blaming their bosses? Except when it suits the idea that the lobby groups who want to maintain this dire state of affairs within the building industry or any other industry for that matter are the ones who, it's the mates thing, it's the money thing, it's all that kind of. I'm not expressing.
I just don't know. No, I don't know how deliberate it is. I think it's there's commercial explanations rather than ideological ones. For some reason, we've ended up in a place now where hate sells. Hate is sexier than whatever the opposite of hate is. Love seems a bit hippie-ish, or lies. Actually, this is better. Dishonesty is more commercially successful than honesty, which kind of makes sense. It always has been. That's what advertising's about.
Whither goes the US, goes the UK at the moment in that sort of particular fake news milieu, as it were. I've watched every day, listened every day to what's been happening with Grenfell and Kensington and Chelsea, with growing horror at knowing that this whole thing is going to be, as Monbiot said, it's going to be a stitch-up. These people are already being...
Well, I know. This is the opposite of where I'm... Again, although we're on the same page in a lot of ways, I don't want that to be taken as a given yet. For example, I don't agree with David Lammy that the judge's background somehow precludes him, but they need to get the faith of the survivors. They need to get the public trust in place as the inquiry unfolds. But I even post Hillsborough, I don't believe there is an appetite for a stitch-up, for an actual stitch-up.
I hope not.
Well, I pray not. And also, I don't think people should be allowing their anger to be articulated in unhelpful ways. But you've got to find helpful ways for their anger to be articulated. Otherwise, you take away their agency. You take away their choice.
An independent inquiry rather than a public inquiry. Is that a better answer?
Well, I mean, who knows? And it's not yet cast in stone. But if the people who've sent their 12 requests and demands to Theresa May don't get any of them met, you can understand why that inquiry is going to be starting off under, I think, an unnecessary shadow. And I still lean more towards incompetence than any form of deliberate manipulation or corruption. These are human beings. Human beings make mistakes. Talking now about Theresa May's attempt to appoint someone to head the child sex abuse inquiry at third or fourth time lucky. Human beings make mistakes. Remember that and maybe get some trust in the inquiry.